Truth is, I am Iron Man.
Many people would say that this is the moment that Tony Stark became Iron Man. But I disagree. And I'll show you how the moment that Tony truly became Iron Man made his ultimate sacrifice inevitable, and what we as fans can learn from Tony's epiphany. Endgame has arrived, and with it the reactions, the feels, the opinions, the think pieces. By now, I've spent more time watching other people digest Endgame than I did watching the movie itself. This is not a video about Endgame. This is a video inspired by Endgame that's going to get into some very real-world stuff about what it means to be a Marvel fan. Now, I've had a few Endgame opinions of my own, a Twitter spat or two, did some quality monologuing to my wife, got informed that I needed to cut that shit out and listen to somebody else for a minute.
Yes, I think it works.
Which brings me back to Tony Stark. He's been on an incredible journey for the last 11 years, and the callback in Endgame to his immortal line at the end of the first movie in the MCU was a heart-wrenchingly brilliant homage to all that's come before. It was a payoff we didn't know we were waiting for to a setup that had been satisfying purely on its own merits.
Avengers, assemble.
As soon as Thanos says, "I am inevitable," I know that he's wrong, that it's not him that's inevitable, and the words and the tears and the words just bubble up inside me, and I'm mouthing them there in the theater along with Tony on the screen, and for a pure, perfect moment, I really feel like I am Iron Man. It was jaw-dropping.
He's pretty good at that, right?
Endgame tried to make the case that Tony's journey and its conclusion mirrored that of his father, who claimed that the greater good has rarely outweighed my own self-interest. But for all his churlish antics through his first two films, by the end of the original Avengers, we watched Tony be the guy
to lay down on a wire
when he pushes a nuke through a wormhole in what was likely to be a one-way trip. The greater good has outweighed Tony's self-interest almost since we've known him, and if his self-interest was perhaps more meaningful in Endgame with a wife and daughter waiting for him, Tony's martyrdom is nothing new. Now, please don't take this as a criticism. Consistent characterization leading to a cathartic conclusion is hardly a flaw, and it may be that more franchises could take that lesson to heart. Because Tony has known for a long time that you can't always
Just cut the wire.
He learned that in a cave, into which a
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
was dragged, and out of which Iron Man emerged. He learned it 22 movies ago, right here.
It's okay. I want this. I want this.
Thank you for saving me.
Don't waste it. Don't waste your life.
That was when the billionaire, genius, playboy, philanthropist learned about empathy. British philosopher Ian King has defined empathy as the virtue of imagining the concerns of someone else as if they were your own. Until this point in the movie, we've seen Tony as callous and self-interested.
To peace.
And at this key moment in his flight from his own personal underworld, Tony doesn't have a direct interest in Jensen's survival. As we soon see, he barely escapes on his own without having to worry about protecting an unarmored companion. Jensen would only have complicated Tony's escape, if not foiled it entirely. But yet, Tony wants him to live. He imagines the value of Jensen's life as if it were his own. For the first time in his charmed, lonely life, Tony is able to see another person as being like him. And from that moment, he can't stop seeing it. He sees it so vividly, long before Wanda ever messes with his mind, that he wants to put
A suit of armor around the world.
He wants everyone to be Iron Man, to be invincible, so that no one else has to die in the dirt, in a cave, the way that Jensen did.
Look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
Peter Parker is wrong, or at least his catchphrase isn't enough. Spider-Man says that with great power comes great responsibility, but what he really means is, with great power ought to come great responsibility. Peter sees a moral imperative there because he has had to face the personal consequences of his own inaction. He knows what tragedy moral failing can bring. Jensen is Tony Stark's Uncle Ben. Tony's capture was due to his laxity in controlling where his weapons went, but he could have had a lot of different reactions to that scenario, including ramping up weapons production to exterminate the terrorists. Instead, he commits to ceasing weapons production, and then goes on to protect people in person as Iron Man. Tony finally felt the impact of his selfishness. Jensen's sacrifice recontextualized Tony's whole system of values, letting him see his past moral failings as what they were. Peter failed Uncle Ben in one particular moment, but Tony had been failing the whole world for his whole life. His newfound ability to experience empathy for another meant that rather than taking Obadiah Stane's path of selfishness, Tony became the Iron Man. Fast forward a decade, and Tony still can't escape it. In the Endgame, it was the empathy that Tony learned in a cave that saved the universe. Empathy is what puts the hero in superhero. Here's the good news for the fans. If you loved Endgame, then you've got empathy. If what I said earlier, and the words and the tears and the words just bubble up inside me and I'm mouthing them there in the theater, if that made any sense to you, then you felt something too. You were able to take the concerns of imaginary Tony Stark and imagine that they were your own. Maybe you're like me and you wrote, "I love you 3000" on your kid's cast when she broke her arm. Maybe you cry at cheeseburgers. You're not just sad that you won't see Tony Stark on screen anymore. You're sad for Tony, for his daughter, for Peter, for Pepper, for the world that's a little less bright without his star streaking across the sky. They are all made up, and you know it's not real, and maybe it's stupid, but you miss him because you have empathy. So let's talk about that. Because if we can show empathy to fictional Tony Stark, we can do it for others too. Real people. Like the people who felt like Thor's depiction in Endgame was one long fat joke. Like the people who were upset that it was a redeemed Natasha who sacrificed herself on Vormir instead of a fallen Clint. Like the people who noticed that the only people we hear about Clint killing are negative stereotypes about people of color. Like the people who found Professor Hulk to be an unsatisfying coda to the pain that Bruce Banner has fought through for the last 10 years. Like the people who felt like the A-Force moment was unconvincing given Marvel's inconsistent commitment to strong female heroes, including within Endgame itself. There's a good chance I've touched a nerve by now. If you're watching this video, you probably love the MCU. Maybe you're nodding along to one of these, but honestly, I don't think I found anybody who seems to object to everything that's possibly objectionable in Endgame. For me, it was the Professor Hulk thing. I just found the off-screen resolution to the main conflict within that character to be unsatisfying. I could go on, but I won't because that's not the point. The point is, you might disagree, but I still think you're great. I didn't notice any of that other stuff that I just mentioned while I was watching the movie, and in the weeks since I saw the movie, I've kind of wavered back and forth on whether I think all of these are fair critiques. I'm not sure all of them are. You might disagree, but I still think you're great. In the wake of Endgame, and another prominent game that shall remain throneless, I've seen a lot of discord in my social media. I've seen hot takes and counter takes, and I've seen passionate arguments for this point or another. I've taken part in some of it, and I confess, I haven't always kept my cool. I haven't always had empathy for people who had a different opinion than my own. I don't think Tony Stark would always have been proud of me. Man, I get it. We love these movies. They speak to us. We empathize with the characters in a deep way. We see the best parts of ourselves in them. When someone points out that part of the movie could be hurtful or offensive, that it's wrong or bad, it's like they're saying that we are bad for liking it. I was totally down for Nat dying on Vormir. Does that make me a misogynist? Well, I mean, does it? And if it turns out that the answer is yes, wouldn't I want to know that so I can fix it? One of the things that's happening in the aftermath of Endgame, and is still actively happening after the end of Thrones, is that fans are challenging one another's interpretation of events. And in doing that, we are challenging one another's perspectives about the nature of the world. Just like Jensen challenged Tony's perspective. Tony did not believe that he had any responsibility to other people. Jensen showed him how we are connected. And Tony changed. The A-Force moment was great. No, it was pandering. It feels like a skirmish is inevitable, but it isn't. If we can remember that the person with the opposite view is a fan just like us, one who we know has empathy because they care so deeply about the movie, then we know that they're capable of seeing our perspective if we offer it, especially if we do so with a degree of humility and respect for our mutual love of this franchise. And likewise, we know that we are capable of challenging ourselves to be open to a new perspective. Isn't one of the reasons that we go to the movies to experience the world in a different way? To see different perspectives that we wouldn't otherwise get to see? Why are we going to stop doing that just because the movie ended? I have my experiences and you have yours. If all I do is defend my own perspective, like Tony did to the reporter in the beginning of the movie, I can't grow. But if I open myself up and genuinely consider another viewpoint, not just to pick it apart, but to mull it over honestly and seriously, then maybe I'll find that there's more to this world than what I've seen with my own eyes. I can still like the A-Force scene, but maybe I consider that it took Marvel a decade to let a woman lead one of their movies, and then it didn't give her anything to do in the movie where she'd been teased as having a big role. Maybe I wonder how that would feel to a woman eager to see someone like herself on screen.
That we're better than this.
Maybe I realize that her perspective is just as valid as mine. We don't have to agree at the end of the day, but if we don't empathize with one another, then we are failing to actually honor what these movies and these heroes are trying to teach us. Look, this isn't rocket science. You don't need some self-righteous YouTuber telling you to be a better person. But we all screw up sometimes. We all slip. That's why the Avengers exist, to help each other, to help us, to catch us when we fall. They're not there to look down on us, to make us feel bad, to call us out for all of our screw-ups. They're there to inspire us.
Doesn't matter what you did, what you were.
If you step out that door, you are an Avenger.
And so, if you're an MCU fan, if you love these characters, be inspired. Let that feeling guide you and realize that what they're showing us is how to be better versions of ourselves. Being a fan of the MCU has been amazing, and Endgame was such a perfect fan service that I felt like Marvel was honoring the energy and time and emotion that I've invested in this franchise. My hope going forward has nothing to do with whether or not Mysterio is actually from another dimension. It's that we as fans can all reflect and grow from the best parts of these films, that we can honor the legacy that Tony Stark gave to us in a cave a decade ago. It's the hope that we can share with one another in peace, learn from one another, and grow together into the heroes that we are all inspired to become. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching. Apologies for the extreme bedhead. I am a husband and father of 3, and I make these videos between like 4 a.m. and 6 a.m., so that's just the time I've got to work on this stuff. But I really hope you enjoyed it, and hope that you can show some empathy for me and your fellow fans in the comment section below. And yeah, thank you very much for those of you who found me through the One Marvelous Scene, which is probably most of you. I am so excited to have you guys here, and hope to be making cool content for you in the future. And yeah, that's it for me, JDM Baldwin. And yeah, that's it for me. I don't have any plugs to make, so JDM Baldwin out. See you soon.